In this video, we're going to cover checklist usage for the Carenado PA-44. We're going to start with a cold and dark to engine start, followed by takeoff and cruise, descent and go around and landing checklists, as well as shutdown, and more. This is close to the actual PA-44 checklist, but tailored to Flight Sim 2020. Once we get into the airplane, the very first checklist we're going to do is before starting engines. And the very first item on the checklist is parking brake, which you'll notice I don't do, which is the whole point of why we have a checklist, to do items that we might forget to do. The next item is radios off, cowl flaps open, carburetor heat off, and you can see the carburetor controls in the up position are the off position. Down is on. And last of all, alternators on. This checklist gets us ready for starting, but also gets rid of any electrical items that we don't need, like the avionics. Now to the good stuff, starting engines. First step is fuel selector on. The red lever should be full forward. Second step is mixtures to rich. Then throttle, 1/4 inch open. And make sure the propeller is full forward. After that, master switch to on. Then electric fuel pump on. On the right side, you'll notice I'm only doing right side items first, then we'll do the left side next. Then ignition switches, the magneto switches, both go to on. And the next thing we'll do is prime the engines and press the starter, but first we need to make sure the right side is clear. It is. So now we'll press the primer button and then press the right starter. And once the engine starts, which it has, we'll adjust the right throttle to idle right there. And then we will check the oil pressure, make sure it's in the green arc. If there's no oil pressure within 30 seconds after start, you would bring the mixture to cutoff. Now we're going to do the exact same procedure, except the left engine, mixtures to rich, prop forward, throttle 1/4 inch open, fuel pump on, left ignition or magnetos to on. Make sure the area is clear on the left engine. Left primer, press the button, then left starter switch. And once the engine is started, bring the throttle to idle, and then monitor oil pressure. Now that the engines are on, alternators are on, we can turn on the avionics, and this is a good point to set up the avionics, type in the destination, and also set up any VORs that need to be set up. The next checklist is before takeoff. This is done at the hold short line or before. The parking brake will be set with the mixtures and props full forward. First thing we're going to do is set the RPM to 1500 and make sure the props can feather. And that will be accomplished by pulling each propeller individually to the feather position and then going back to full forward. We don't want to let the propeller RPM drop more than 500 RPMs. Once that's complete, we're going to run the RPM up to 2000 for more checks. So there's 2000. The first thing we're going to check is the propeller governor. Think of the propeller governor as cruise control on a car. If you set your cruise for 65 miles per hour, it's going to hold 65. The propeller governor is going to hold a certain RPM. That's what we're checking here. We're going to move the RPM down to 1900, advance the throttle. When that happens, the propeller speed should come back to 1900 RPMs. The RPM went right back to 1900 where it was set previously. That's a good check. Once that's done, both prop controls can go full forward. Next is carburetor heat. We need to check it. We need to turn on carburetor heats individually and back to off on both sides. Unfortunately, in Flight Sim 2020, as far as I can see, this doesn't do anything. Next is the magneto check. We're going to check each ignition switch on each side individually and watch for an RPM drop. You only want to turn off one switch at a time. If you turn them both off, you're going to shut your engine off. We're looking for a maximum RPM drop of 175 RPMs, but a maximum differential of 50 between the two drops. You can see the drop on the RPM gauge. You can also hear the drop when the engine changes speed. You can hear the oscillation between the two engines. The reason for the drop in RPM is because when you turn off a magneto, you're turning off half the spark plugs. The magnetos are the ignition system. That's what controls the spark to the spark plugs. So if you turn one off, only one spark plug per cylinder is firing versus two. We also want to check the alternator output. Once we're done with that, the throttles can come to idle. Next, we want to make sure the fuel selectors are both on. Electric fuel pumps to on. Alternators on. Make sure the engine gauges are in the green. Next, we'll press the press to test button and check the annunciators on the annunciator panel. Want to make sure that we don't have any burnout light bulbs. We need to set our altimeter. You can set it manually or on the keyboard. You can press the B button and that will set it. We'll also set our mixtures for takeoff. If we're at a high elevation airport, you don't want full rich on the mixtures. You want to set them back a little bit to get peak EGT. We'll go over mixture setting and EGT when we get into cruise. Carburetor is still off. Cowl flaps are set. Wing flaps are set to 0. The trim is set. And we want to check our flight controls. We turn to the left, the aileron goes up. We turn to the right, the left aileron goes down, and vice versa. The last item on this checklist is the pitot heat. It's a warm day today. We don't really need it. If it's cold, you can turn the pitot heat on. That's all the way over here on the right. Now for the best part, takeoff checklist. We're going to go full power, accelerate to 75 knots, then rotate. Then after breaking ground, we're going to accelerate to the best rate of climb speed, 88 knots. Once we hit that, we're going to go gear up. So then we rotate as we hit 75 knots. Once we hit 88, and we're already out of usable runway, gear up. And while we're climbing with the flaps up, the best rate of climb is 88 knots. Best rate is going to give us the most altitude in the shortest amount of time. Best angle is 82 knots. That's going to give us the highest altitude in the shortest distance. And in route climb, we're going to climb at 105 knots. So we'll momentarily level off at 1,500, then we'll continue a climb to 3,000 feet, and then start the cruise checklist. Another thing you'll notice, when you climb, about every 1,000 feet, your manifold pressure will drop approximately 1 inch. That's normal. And when I say that's normal for normally aspirated airplanes, not turbocharged airplanes. To a point. However, this airplane is not turbocharged, but it would be nice if it was. Now that we're continuing our cruise checklist, this first item is the power set as per the power table, which is on the back of the sun visor. Mixture controls adjust, cowl flaps adjust, and fuel pumps off. The checklist actually says turn the electric fuel pumps off at desired altitude. You could leave them on until you get to cruise altitude. Here I am setting the throttle to 21 squared, 21 inches of manifold pressure, followed by 2100 RPMs. Next, I'm going to set the mixture. I'm going to pull the mixture control lever back until the EGT needle peaks. When it peaks, I'm going to go 1 click forward until the EGT drops. The descent checklist, first item is mixtures. We want to enrich in the mixtures. As we descend, the air gets thicker, therefore we need more fuel. Next is set the throttles, and then cowl flaps closed. As we descend with less power on the engine's going to cool down. We want to try and maintain some engine temperature and keep the engine warm. We do not want to shock cool engines. So we'll close the cowl flaps and keep some heat in the engines. The first step in the approach and landing checklist is fuel selectors to on, cowl flaps as required, electric fuel pumps on, mixture controls rich, prop controls full forward, landing gear down. We can put the landing gear down up to 140 knots, and then flaps, we can put in the first notch of flaps when we're at or below 111 knots. Once we've got full flaps, we want an approach speed of 75 knots, indicated airspeed or above. We're going to skip the actual landing. Next step is go around. We might do a go around if a vehicle runs out on the runway, if there's an airplane on the runway, an animal. There's countless reasons why you might do a go around. When we do a go around, the first thing we're going to do is climb. The easiest way to do that is add full power. Once that's done, we're going to go flaps up, and then gear up once we have a positive rate of climb, and then adjust the cowl flaps. And what you know is I plan to do a go around for a video. There actually is a vehicle on the runway, so we'll take that as we need to do a go around. So we've set full power, flaps are retracted, gear up, and then once we get to a safe altitude, we can adjust the cowl flaps and then follow the checklist for a go around. This is not a checklist you would want to look down and read and do as you're doing it. This is one you would want to know and just be able to do it. Get to a safe altitude, then pull the checklist out and make sure you've covered everything. Next, we'll go through an engine failure and a landing with one engine inoperative. If an engine fails in flight, the first three things we're going to do is move the mixtures, props, and throttles all the way forward. Then we're going to identify. We use the saying dead foot, dead engine. If you push on the rudder pedal to keep the airplane straight, whatever foot you're not using to push on a rudder pedal is the dead engine. So in this case, the right engine's dead. We can verify that by looking at the engine gauges. We can see the RPM on the right side is down about 1100. Another thing we can do when we verify the dead engine, we know the right engine's dead. When we pull the right throttle back, we can notice that there's no changes. We verify that is the correct engine. Then we can pull the propeller all the way back and into feather. Feathering the propeller increases our chance of being able to climb and just reduces the drag on the airplane. Once we've feathered and secured the engine and the landing's assured, we can select gear down. Once the gear's down, we can select the first notch of flaps. And when we are doing a single engine approach and landing, we want to maintain additional altitude and speed during the approach. We do not want to go slower than 90 knots indicated airspeed. And once the landing's assured, we can go flaps 25. We do not want to use the last notch of flaps. That's just a lot of extra drag. And with those flaps, the airplane more than likely will not be able to climb. And as I've said it before, in case you're wondering, I will put all these checklists that I've used in the video in the description if anybody wants to print it. You can also find them online. They're not tailored to Flight Sim 2020 like I've done, but they are out there. That's where I got them. And we finally have gear down. You can see we are slightly higher than normal, as the checklist says maintain additional altitude and speed during the approach, but no less than 90 knots. And once we get a little closer, we'll note flaps 25. And one thing to point out, that 90 knot speed, if you go slower than that, you have to add power. It's very difficult to get airspeed back on one engine. It's better just to stay 5 knots fast than it is to get 5 knots slow. That's pretty much all there is on that. Now we'll skip ahead to the landing and shutdown checklist. First step on the after landing checklist is to clear the runway. And that means get the whole airplane past the hold short line. Then fully retract the flaps. Then open the cowl flaps, which they already are fully open. Carburetor heat to cold or off. Electric fuel pumps to off. They already are. And they should have been on, but I was doing something else previously and they were off, but they should be off. Then avionics master switch off. And the last steps deal with shutting the engines off. Throttles to idle, mixtures to cut off. Then magneto switches to off. Once those are off, master switch off. And that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you're enjoying the PA-44. I am. It's a great airplane. I think it's now the best airplane on Flight Sim 2020 compared to the default airplanes. So thank you again, and until next time.